as I mentioned, we're in period 8, and it ranges from 1945 to 1980, and it's largely deals with, among other things, relations between the United States and Soviet Union, and in an era called the Cold War. Why is it called the Cold War? Because it's chilly in Russia. Yeah, there was. I mean, as far as like an actual 100% like American versus Soviet Union soldier on a battlefield shooting at each other, that didn't really happen. Okay, but the forces of capitalism versus the forces of communism face off across the globe in this time period. All right. If we were to really trace the origins and the beginnings of the Cold War, we could really trace it back toward the end of World War II. All right? Now, at the beginning of World War II, before the United States even got involved, only in like 1940, before Pearl Harbor even, there was a meeting between Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Winston Churchill. This meeting took place relatively in secret in Newfoundland. Newfoundland, spell it like Newfoundland, one word. And in which they discussed what became known as the Atlantic Charter. The Atlantic Charter, which really and basically establishes the goals for the Allies at the conclusion of the war. So it's almost working on the assumption that the Allies were going to win, which was by no means guaranteed. 1940, Hitler had control basically of all of Europe. The Japanese had control of all of Southeast Asia. So it was very ambitious. But the goal, obviously, their main goal in the Atlantic Charter was to do what? Before they can do anything, they got to do what? They got to win the war. So that's goal number 1 of the Atlantic Charter, win the war. Another goal of the Atlantic Charter was to establish the United Nations. What's the United Nations? Or UN. What is that? Was there already an organization like the United Nations that existed? What was it called? The League of Nations. So how is the United Nations going to be different from the League of Nations? Okay, America would be in it. That's a big difference. The United States never technically joined the League of Nations, only sent official observers. Anything else? What could the League of Nations do? What actions could the League of Nations take? None, really. It just provided a platform where nations could come and discuss. That's what the League of Nations did. The United Nations would actually have some teeth to it, all right? It would have a security council. It would have things that would allow for people to make their own decisions. They're called self-determination. Free markets, free access for everything and everybody. Very ambitious plan, okay? So first, as far as the United Nations go, they would have to create the part of the United Nations that would be like the League of Nations, and that's the General Assembly. The General Assembly. This was like what the League of Nations was. And this is an actual photograph of the United Nations General Assembly. Oh, I'd say that's about a 10-year-old photograph. So basically what the General Assembly is, it's like a legislative body where countries could talk. So the UN would have that aspect. So that would, like the General Assembly is like the entire League of Nations. Okay? But FDR and Churchill would also add more aspects to the UN in addition to just the General Assembly, like the Security Council, which you can see is smaller. And I don't want to call the UN Security Council the global police force. I don't want to call them that. But sometimes they do act like that. Sometimes. If another nation's getting out of line, the United Nations can act like that, act like a global police force. But what the Security Council does is helps to provide global security, to use military might to help keep peace. That's what it's intended to do. All right. Another part was that there would be like various administrations and bureaucracies. It's basically, it's kind of like a world government, kind of. But not everybody has an equal say. Like the United States has way more say in what goes on in the United Nations than, say, Sardinia or Moldova, because the United States is more powerful. And the Soviet Union had a lot of say as well. Okay? So basically, the Atlantic Charter and the United Nations wanted to have a world order that would establish democracy. Democracy. Because it also wants self-determination and free markets and free trade. Initially, the United Nations was not successful. Very much a failure. Why do you think initially, after World War II was over and the United Nations was created, that everything they did failed? Who all is in favor of democracy and free markets and self-determination? Does that sound like something that Joseph Stalin can get behind? No. And he is a very powerful member of the United Nations and blocked every single thing that the Americans tried to do. All right? Why would the Soviet Union even want to join an organization that wants to promote democracy, self-government, self-determination, free markets, and free trade across the world? Why would the Soviet Union even want to be a part of that? They don't. They don't. So why did they join it? Why did they sign it? Why did they become a part of this idea set forth in the Atlantic Charter? Maybe. Yeah, definitely. Well, when was this idea crafted? The idea of the United Nations? At the beginning or the end? It was crafted at the beginning with the Atlantic Charter. And it was made by the Allied powers. England, the United States, and then ultimately, who got in on it? The Soviet Union. The Soviet Union. So, why would they get behind this idea? Why would they do that? Why would they join this Allied force?
The alliance system.
Okay. You're getting closer. Did Russia need the United States and Great Britain to do what? To defeat Germany. All right, so he wanted to get help. So he's just going to join it so that the Americans and Great Britain would help and fight the Germans on the Western Front while he fought them on the Eastern Front. Plus, America had lots of stuff, products, food, goods, weapons, things of that nature. Also, just because he joins it, does he really have any intention of holding true to it? No, and he never does. He never once holds true to the charter. So, that was in like 1940. And when America gets drawn into the war in 41, things progress with the United Nations. As you get into 1945, it's becoming more and more evident that Germany is going to fail. They are going to lose, all right? and another meeting is held. This one is held in a place called Yalta on the Crimean Peninsula, which was once part of the Soviet Union and is now in the present-day country of Ukraine. This was the most important meeting held of the big three, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, during World War II. Because here is where the Allied powers, those three men and their nations, discussed what the world was going to be like when the war was over, which was coming to an end. Here is where you begin to see the motivation for the Soviets and the Americans and the British to be buds. Because once Germany is really defeated and falls apart, does the Soviet Union have any need for the Americans or for the British? No. Do they have any need to pretend to be a part of some organization that doesn't line up with their own principles? No. And at Yalta, it becomes quite clear that there's going to be some disagreeing to be had. So the motivation for friendship disappears at the Yalta Conference. And the differences between Western nations, like the United States, like Great Britain, and the Soviet Union become very apparent. Very apparent. So at this point, the war is still going on, but it's all but over for the Germans. They're very, very near total defeat. Okay? Hitler is hiding in a bunker at this point in Berlin. All right? So it was clear that the vast majority of Europe had been liberated by what country? Who did most of the dirty work in World War II? Russia. Russia did a significant amount of the fighting. And it was, Russia liberated a lot of those places, and so therefore he wanted those places to be under Soviet control. Soviet meaning Soviet Union. So the Americans said, okay, that's fine. That's only fair, You paid of all the deaths that happened amongst soldiers during World War II, you can see that the Soviet Union paid their fair share. And it only seemed fair that the Soviet Union claim what they believed was theirs. But the Americans had one request, that in those areas that the Soviet Union was going to claim for themselves, that they would have free democratic elections. So at least the people there could decide if they want to be communists and have that's fine. But let's let the people decide. So the USSR was supposed to have a free and fair election in those regions that they liberated, which would be places like present-day Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia, the Baltic states, not Czechoslovakia. I can't remember the southern one. I can't remember. But Eastern Europe, all right? Those places were all under the control of the Soviet Union. And they did have an election, but it was not free or fair, because they had an election, and the people voted for democracy. They elected democratic people, like people that would represent them democratically. Stalin expected that the communists would win, so he didn't mess with the election until the results came in, and he just wiped those results away, had another election, and fixed it to where the communists would win. He had an election. He had two, actually. Is he doing what the Americans asked him to do? Technically, yeah, he had an election. So if you try to look at it through Russia's point of view, through the Soviet Union point of view, through the eyes of Stalin, which I don't recommend you do frequently, as he is a mass murderer. But the Soviet Union, in the eyes of the Soviet leadership, felt like they had a good reason for throwing those elections out and maintaining authority over those regions. What do you think their reason was? Why do they want to maintain authority over those regions? Give me a brief description of what the 20th century had been like for the Soviet Union up to 1945.
Like dictatorship, like really strong.
You guys want to go on vacation in the Soviet Union anywhere between 1917 and 1945? How come? Oh my goodness. All right, World War I, which their czar gets and his family is murdered during, which leads to a 5-year-long civil war that doesn't end until 1923, in which is replaced by Bolsheviks, and then Russia gets drawn into World War II, and in both World War I and World War II, the Soviet Union had the most casualties. Not to mention, during the Civil War and then the Great Purge from 1934 to 1939, Joseph Stalin kills like 9 million of his own people. Why do they want this territory? They want to have control over all of it so that their citizens are no longer exposed to war. Fewer enemies. If they're part of the Soviet Union, they're not going to be enemies. They'll be one of us. Their war casualties had already reached like 22 million people. They were tired of being invaded by Germany, most likely. And they saw, after World War II was over, who was their greatest threat to them? Who was the greatest threat to the Soviet Union after World War II? Us, the United States of America. Because the Soviet military strategy was one of time and space. Time and space. How big is Russia?
Huge.
It is absolutely enormous. It's the largest political nation on Earth, geographically. Look, it is huge. Now, it's not really that big because this is a map and it's, try to make something round, flat, it's going to be some distortion. But it's still very large. Okay? And their military strategy, like if you wanted to try to attack the Soviet Union, where are you going to do it? You want to invade Russia? Where do you want to do it? You got to invade the whole thing. Not an easy job. But the United States had recently shown, do they have to invade anywhere to conquer you? They could send one pilot in one plane and just fly and just drop one bomb every once in a while. And could they not destroy the entire nation? Had the Americans proven that they could do it? Had the Americans recently proven that they would do it? Yeah. Ask the Japanese if the Americans would drop an atomic weapon. How many atomic weapons did the Soviet Union have in 1945? 0. So, were the Americans seen as a threat? Yes, to everyone. They were the bully on the block. Nobody's going to mess with them. So, with the American atomic weapons and long-range bombers and ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, the United States could attack the Soviet Union and not even mobilize the military. Just be like, hey, we need like 3 pilots. You guys go. And then they could do it. So many people that's the hammer and sickle. That's the symbol of the Soviet Union. Okay. At the end of World War II, many American leaders, like General George Patton, remember him? Ever heard of him? One of America's greatest generals during World War II. World War I veteran also. He was a tank commander, leader of the 3rd Army. Patton believed, hey, we're already here. We have soldiers here. We have our tanks and our troops and our supplies. Let's start World War III with them and just get it over with. And he was very publicly outspoken about this. Russians knew what he was talking about, okay? He called for America to invade the Soviet Union at the end of World War II. Called for it. And he was basically shipped back home to the United States pretty quickly as a result of his outspokenness. So, the Russians understood. Patton's nickname was Old Blood and Guts. Yeah, because his soldiers would say our blood and his guts. So he'd send them into battle, and but he was good. He was a good leader. My papa fought in his army, the Third Army. He drove a tank. Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, he was wounded too. Purple Heart. So but yeah, Patton was very outspoken about invading Russia in very coarse, soldier-like language. Very profane man. Very profane man. There's a movie called Patton, and I would show you a clip, but about
The language.
and this was like made in the '60s, and I still can't show it to you. All right, nothing you haven't heard before this morning probably, but if you ever get the opportunity to watch it, do so with parental supervision. It's a good movie. Okay, so the Russians understood the implications of nuclear weapons, and you can see just how far the Soviet Union spread after World War II. You can see that. Let me see if I can get my laser pointer. All right, so there's going to be a definite delineation between East and West. Germany itself is split in half into two new countries. West Germany, which would be under the control of the Allies, and East Germany, which would be under the control of the Soviet Union. All right? And you see, like, this right here is present-day Ukraine. It's not even like, it was just totally straight-up Soviet Union the entire time. Okay? See, here's Crimean Peninsula down in the Black Sea. Anyway, but these are the newly under the control of the Soviet Union nations: Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, all the way into Eastern Germany. Germany's even split in half. So, geographically, if you look at it, Russia is kind of surrounded by allied friends. You got Turkey here, Greece here, Norwegians up here, most of the Scandinavian peninsula, or will be at least friendly to the Allied powers. Okay, if nothing else, neutral. That's what the white or the cream-colored countries represent, meaning they just they have no dog in the fight. So geographically, Russia was surrounded by American friends and allies. They really have no place to go. So they kind of begin to adopt a new strategy, all right? And their strategy is very simple after World War II is over. Be bold and take every opportunity that came their way. Be bold and have a standoffish attitude at every single thing America wanted to do. If America wanted to give out free popsicles to planet Earth on a Tuesday, the Soviet Union would oppose it. No free popsicles. And anything America wanted to try to accomplish, and where is it that America can accomplish things and the Soviet Union have a say? In the American government? Where is it that the Americans are trying to accomplish things and the Soviet Union can actually have a say? The United Nations. The United Nations. So anytime anything that happened that the Americans proposed in the UN, the Soviet Union would immediately be standoffish about, and almost bullyish over. Having a very standoffish attitude at all things the Americans wanted to do, and opposed America in every way that they could. Another way to try to gain favor in the world was to make allies with countries that were unhappy with their own government. So places that are volatile, places that are ripe for revolution, and become their friends in hopes that the dissidents, the people who are unhappy with their government, would eventually overthrow their government, and then Russia would have instant allies. I mean, think about it. Like, if you're a country and you support someone who's overthrowing their government and they win, you're going to be like best buds, because you helped them. You helped them. So that becomes the Soviet strategy. Just be oppositional, defiant, standoffish, not really somebody you want to be best buds with, right? It becomes very difficult to be friendly with them, because why? Even if America would make something like, it's just because of the nature of their policy toward America. Hey, we want to give the Soviet Union $1 billion. No. Like, they're going to be standoffish about it. Okay, now America never put that forward, but that was their policy. Like, anything America put forward, we're going to be standoffish about. Okay, so now these things emerge where you have to figure out what the other side is going to do before they do it, so you're prepared. How do you do that? Yeah. Spies. Like Bond. James Bond. The Soviets would make every effort to try to thwart, a word that I love to use and don't get to use very much, thwart every American design or every issue that the Americans came up with. The Soviets want to try to thwart that. And one way that the Soviet Union could accomplish this was through spying. The United States and Soviet Union had and have a long history of spying on one another. There was a known spy in the Soviet Union who was like best friends with Bobby Kennedy, and when he was the Attorney General, and his brother was President of the United States. Like, they'd eat dinner together and stuff. And they knew he was a spy. He kind of used it as a back channel. He'd be like, okay, look, I'm going to give you information, and you tell your leadership in Russia exactly what we're thinking. It was actually kind of smart, because it would be like, hey, we're not going to send atomic weapons at you, so please tell your buds over there to call off the dogs, all right? So, but the United States and the Soviet Union had a long history of spying on each other, and whenever the governments use spies, what is that called? There's a special name for it. Espionage. When government sanctioned spying, is called espionage. Espionage. Espionage was used in all facets of government. All facets of government. Americans had spies in the Russian government, Soviet government, and the Soviets had spies all throughout America, spying on each other and reporting back. So, you got some propaganda here. The Soviets like to use female spies. Americans pretty loose-lipped with their ladies in the sheets, I guess. And you also saw some new spy technology emerge, which I think is pretty cool. It's like a glove gun. Little tiny cameras. Cameras have come a long way, I guess. All right, so that's kind of the American point, or the Soviet point of view. They're going to be standoffish against this bully, the United States, that could annihilate our entire population if they wanted to. So we're just going to we're going to show them that we're not going to be somebody to be messed with. All right. So, but all right, what about like the American point of view? Let's look at the American point of view. Americans don't really know that much about the Soviet Union. We really didn't. And they don't know much about us. Our cultures are different. Okay? And it's not anyone's fault. It's just ignorance. We just don't know. We are ignorant of each other. We are ignorant of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union is ignorant of us. So Americans had to try to figure out why Stalin and why the Soviet leadership and the Soviet government behaves the way they did. Like, why are they doing this? Why are they being so loud and threatening and always against us? Why are they doing? Like, we want to know why. What's the issue here? Are they not ungrateful for the help that we offered? Because we're grateful to them. Basically, Americans and the American leadership just thought that Russians were offensive, rude jerks. Offensive, rude jerks. That was the assessment of the Russian people and the Russian leadership. So, were they really offensive, rude jerks? Why did we think they were offensive, rude jerks? It was their strategy to be offensive, rude jerks. They weren't really. That's just what their strategy became. And it was their strategy because they were afraid. What are they afraid of? Annihilation. So you have two people, two countries, the most powerful, militarily strong countries on planet Earth, afraid of each other and unable to communicate. Sounds like a recipe for fantastic life, right? More like a recipe for disaster.
If I was afraid of annihilation, then I would not be standoff.
It's
yeah. That would not be my battle.
All right. How you beat a bully? How do you beat a bully? Do you or you stand up to him? You stand up to him.
That's true. Hey, why wouldn't they have just like they could have just like sucked up to US or something? Like,
Yeah,
it became like huge allies or something.
Yeah.
That's what I would definitely want.
Well, we have very different ideas on government.
Oh.
And yeah. So that was not going to happen. So, yeah, we just thought they were offensive, rude jerks. But being an offensive, rude jerk was their sanctioned strategy. Like, hey, we're going to be offensive, rude jerks. So we just kind of thought, when I say we, the United States, just kind of thought that was the character of the Russian people to act that way. So we can't be like, we couldn't really believe it. Like, there had to be more to the story. So Americans and the United States found an expert on Russia. And his name is George Kennan. George Kennan. He's an American who's an expert on Russia. Now, his title is technically, he is the Consul General to Russia. He's a diplomat. Okay? He's a diplomat. And he had been in Russia for several years, looking at Russian people, reading the Russian newspapers, analyzing their leaders, reading their history. And late in the 1940s, he writes a telegram to then President of the United States, Harry Truman. And he writes this telegram because he was asked to give his assessment of the Russian people and the Russian leadership. About why these Russians are behaving the way they are. All right, this telegram becomes known as the Long Telegram, and that's the copy of it over there. And it was published in the Journal of Foreign Affairs. This telegram is the only input that American leadership was given about Russia. It's the only information, the only input about Russian leadership the Americans were given. So it was essential that the information in this long telegram be accurate and be interpreted correctly. So what does it say? I'll tell you tomorrow.